Hey guys, tonight, we trudge back in time to a world of muddy roads, flickering torches, and the unmistakable scent of open-air fish markets. You're walking through a medieval village now, ducking under sagging laundry lines and trying not to step in whatever the goat left behind. That's right, tonight we're talking about what dating was like in medieval times. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking along a packed dirt road lined with uneven wooden homes and the occasional bleating sheep tethered to a post. The air hums with chatter, bartering gossip, the occasional shouted prayer. The ground is muddy, even on a sunny day, thanks to chamber pots dumped from upper windows and livestock with zero boundaries. You dodge a duck, then step into something questionable. Romance. In this, somehow, yes, in this world, your love life starts with proximity and timing. If you're lucky, you spot someone your age, not always guarantees who doesn't already have a promised match, hasn't taken religious vows, and isn't technically your cousin, though medieval definitions of too close are flexible. There's no Tinder, no awkward small talk at coffee shops, no you-up texts. What you've got is the town square, the market stalls, and maybe a fair or a feast once every few weeks. You better hope your crush also needs onions at the same time. You eye the baker's daughter, rosy-cheeked, flour-dusted, and laughing as she slaps dough onto a tray. She's too busy to notice you, but that's fine. Courtship isn't exactly a thing yet. You're not expected to sweep her off her feet. Not unless you own the land under them. Social status makes or breaks everything. If you're a peasant, your choices are limited to your own class, which usually means marrying for survival more than sparks. A strong back and a full pantry go further than sweet words. If you're a noble, love's a performance with rules, rituals, and absolutely no cow dung involved. You pass a group of washerwomen gossiping near the stream, their hands red and raw in the cold water. They glance at you, then go back to laughing. Not your day, but you hear stories about couples who fell in love at harvest festivals or who carved secret messages into tree bark. There's a tree outside town covered in hearts and initials. Most of those couples married other people, but still, it's something. Your world is noisy. Horse hooves clatter on stones, bells ring from the church tower, pigs squeal, someone coughs wetly nearby, which is never a good sign. But love blooms even here, like a stubborn weed in a cracked wall. And it's not all doom and gloom. There are real moments of sweetness too, like two teenagers holding hands behind a hay cart, pretending they're not. You pass the smithy where sparks fly in bursts of orange against the dark interior. The blacksmith's apprentice catches your eye and smirks. Maybe it's flirtation. Maybe he's just got soot in his eye. Either way, you flush and keep walking. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person truly felt romantic love the way we define it today, or if it was mostly obligation alliances and hormones doing their thing. Some letters suggest longing, devotion, even passion. Others read more like shopping lists. One knight wrote rather poetically that he longed for his lady's favor. which she apparently gave to 3 different nights that week. Medieval drama, never dull. And then there's the whole hygiene situation. No toothpaste, bathing rare. But hey, if everyone smells, no one does. It's all relative, quirky, fact time. In some regions, people believed that sleeping with a piece of bread under your pillow could make you dream of your future spouse. Imagine waking up with breadcrumbs in your ear and going, "Ah yes, true love awaits." You wander past the town well, where several young women are gathering water. This is prime flirting territory, lots of eye contact over heavy buckets. But you hesitate. Last time you tried to help someone carry water, you dropped the bucket and splashed mud all over her dress. She hasn't spoken to you since. Still, tomorrow's another chance. Another market day, another maybe meeting. The rhythm of village life is steady and slow. It gives you time to notice, to wonder, to plan that one good joke you'll use when the moment is right. Don't worry, it won't land, but she might laugh anyway. And hey, love can surprise you. Maybe it shows up during Lent when everyone's grumpy and hungry. Maybe it's someone you've known forever who suddenly looks different in the spring light. Maybe it's the person who shares their last slice of barley bread with you, which in medieval terms is basically a proposal. By now the sky darkens, torches flicker along wooden beams. The village begins to quiet except for a baby crying and one guy loudly singing off-key. You slip into your cottage dreams of love, lingering just behind your eyes. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it's real, and it's yours. You wake to the faint clang of a bell, the distant creak of wagon wheels, and the snuffling of a pig that somehow nudged open your cottage door. Typical. You shoo it away and start your day, but there's something else on your mind that Look the baker's daughter gave you or might have given you. Time to assess your odds. Step 1 in medieval dating. Look in the mirror, well, a polished bronze plate, and see if you meet the standards of attractiveness. So spoiler, they're wildly different from today's filtered selfies. You don't need six-pack abs or a killer jawline. You need a hearty complexion, decent teeth, if any, and enough muscle to survive plowing season. A smooth face and pale skin are seen as signs of nobility because you don't work in the sun all day. For peasants, calloused hands and sturdy legs are kind of the medieval equivalent of a gym selfie. Being able to carry a sack of grain without passing out hot. But also, lice. Everyone has them. Lice combs are a popular gift among lovers, not flowers, not chocolates, combs. You sit next to your sweetheart and casually run a carved wooden comb through her hair, whispering sweet nothings while flicking bugs into the fire. Nothing says romance like delousing together. It's sort of intimate in a mutually itchy kind of way. Historians still argue whether lice were truly tolerated or simply endured, but personal cleanliness had wildly varying standards. Nobles might bathe once a month, peasants once a season. Maybe. Soap is rare and expensive, but animal fat and ashes do the trick in a pinch. If someone smells vaguely smoky and slightly like bacon, that's just how people smell. Oh, and you better have good teeth, not because anyone's judging your smile, but because dental pain is a real mood killer. That, and the risk of dying from a rotten molar that spreads infection to your brain. You try flirting with an abscess. It's not ideal. Still, people find love. You see it in how a young man smooths his tunic before approaching the woman spinning wool at the corner. He's no poet, but he's got a kind face and a gift, a carved spoon, homemade. It might have taken him weeks. She blushes, tucks it into her apron. Score. Your own family expects you to marry someone sensible, which usually means a girl with some land or at least a cow. Love is negotiable milk, not so much. Dowries are key. A daughter is married with something linen's livestock tools. Sometimes the bride even brings her own mattress as stuffed with straw and local herbs to keep out pests. You once heard of a woman whose dowry included 3 chickens and a cursed bell. Long story. Looks help, but lineage matters more. You learn that one of the girls in town is descended from a minor knight who once saved a baron from choking on a plum. That's social gold. The plum-saving lineage still gets respect generations later. And yet quirky but true, some people believed moles and freckles revealed your fate in love. A mole near the lip, sensual and flirty. A freckle near the eye, doomed to heartbreak. You try not to stare at people too long, checking for cosmic clues. It's impolite. Your clothes say something too. A clean tunic, carefully mended, shows effort. Embroidery, especially if it's done by the wearer, can be a subtle courtship signal. You spend 3 weeks stitching a fish into your sleeve. No one knows why. You don't either. It just felt romantic. Then there's hair. Long hair on women is desirable if modestly covered. On men, it's fine as long as it's brushed. Well, relatively brushed. But the real status move a hat, a feathered cap, a braided snood, or a veil pinned just right. You don't have any of that. You have a hood with one torn seam and something unidentifiable on it. But it's not all about appearance. Your ability to make someone laugh matters too. A jester gets more attention than you'd expect. Humor softens hard lives. You're not exactly hilarious, but you try your best. You compare your neighbor's beard to a thatch roof hit by lightning. He laughs. His sister laughs. You note that for later. Historians still debate how much choice the average person had in love. Sure, noble marriages were arranged, and even peasants had to negotiate with families. But stories of forbidden love suggest people wanted to choose, even when they couldn't. You hear whispers of a couple who married secretly under a tree, with only a chicken as a witness. It didn't hold up in court, but still, romantic. You see the baker's daughter again at the market. This time she looks, definitely. You nod. She smirks. Progress. A breeze carries the scent of baking bread, and something more pungent fish, probably. You wonder how anyone ever fell in love in a place that smells like wet fur and feet. But maybe the very fact that it's so grim makes those rare glimmers of attraction feel brighter, like a candle in a cave. You catch your reflection in a puddle. Your hair's doing something weird. Your tunic's stained from breakfast, and you've got flour on your nose from your own clumsy attempt at bread making. But you're alive. You've got all your teeth for now, and someone might like you, just as you are. You walk on head a little higher, because maybe love isn't just about looks or lineage or whether you currently have fleas. Maybe it's about being seen flaws, stains, odd stitching and all. You make your way to the village market, the weekly social hub, where vegetables gossip and accidental eye contact all get traded in equal measure. The path there is packed with the usual clucking chickens, cranky donkeys, and 2 older women arguing over whether yesterday's turnips were cursed or just badly cooked, you sidestep a cart full of leeks and prepare to enter what passes for medieval speed dating. The market is loud, fragrant, and full of potential. Not romantic potential necessarily, unless you're the kind of person who swoons over someone haggling fiercely over radishes but social potential. This is where everyone sees and is seen. It's also basically the only public gathering where unmarried people are allowed to mingle, sort of. You're watched, of course, by your neighbor, your friend's mum, and 3 people who just love drama. But there's room for subtlety. A glance here, a touch too long handing someone a coin. Scandalous stuff. You spot the baker's daughter again. She's helping her father sell honey cakes. Her sleeves rolled up hair tied back with a bit of twine. Someone cracks a joke near her stall, and she throws her head back laughing. You watch from a perfectly reasonable distance, pretending to be fascinated by onions. Then an opening. She drops a cake. You leap to help bump heads mid-reach, and both laugh awkwardly. You mutter something about the cake being too eager to escape. She doesn't cringe. Win. Of course you're not alone. There's a group of youths across the way, each trying their version of the perfect medieval pickup. One plays a lute badly. Another juggles apples, which seems to impress absolutely no one. One bold soul attempts to quote courtly love poetry, but gets stuck halfway through and mutters something about goats. Ah, youth? Historians still argue whether these market interactions truly counted as dating, or if they were more like supervised scouting missions for marriage. But given how many folks ended up married to the person they met at the cabbage stall, it clearly worked. And don't forget the role of chaperones. They're not just for nobles. Even among peasants, a younger sister or a friend is often coincidentally nearby during conversations. You try to say something nice, and there's always a second pair of eyes squinting at you over a basket of beans. A quirky fact. In some villages, unmarried women wore their hair loose, while married women kept it braided and covered. So if someone's got her braid peeking out, that's a subtle back-off sign, unless she's rebellious, or forgot, or wants people to think she forgot. You attempt a second conversation at the cloth stall. This time she comments on the weather. Classic small talk. You nod like this is fascinating meteorological data. Meanwhile, her aunt appears out of nowhere, gives you the I know your entire family look, and starts inspecting a bolt of linen without blinking. The moment is gone. Still it's progress. Every word exchanged is like another brick in a very slow, very wobbly bridge. But hey, it's better than what your friend Gerbert did. He brought a live rabbit as a gift. It bit the girl. She cried. The rabbit escaped. No one has seen it since. You notice another couple walking arm in arm. Bold. Technically touching like that could mean you're contracted as in on your way to marriage. Some villages treat hand-holding very seriously. A touch too long and boom, your uncle's building a dowry chest. Which, by the way, is why so many people keep their hands to themselves, except during dances. Ah yes, dances. More on that later, but for now, imagine tightly scripted moves where you're allowed to briefly hold hands before spinning away like nothing happened. The medieval version of a steamy text message. But back to the market. You browse the stalls, chatting idly with anyone who'll talk always, with one eye out for that person. You know the one? Maybe it's the way they laugh, or how they look directly at you instead of pretending not to notice. Or maybe it's the way they didn't flinch when you knocked over a barrel of apples last week. At the spice merchant's stand, you spot a bundle of dried lavender. Supposedly, it's lucky in love. You buy it awkwardly. The merchant raises an eyebrow and mutters, "She'll like it." You don't ask how he knows. Medieval shopkeepers have unsettling intuition. You walk back through the market past stalls selling everything from dried fish to wooden spoons to questionable meat pies. People are beginning to pack up, and there's a sleepy lull as sunlight shifts through clouds. You spot her one last time. She's wiping flour from her hands. You offer the lavender. She hesitates, then smiles, takes it. A moment, a spark. Then her little brother runs up and yells something about goats eating a shoe, and she dashes off. Romance Medieval Edition as a brief, clumsy, monitored, and yet somehow magic. The air is still warm from the day's bustle, but as twilight creeps in, the village transforms. The market stalls are gone, replaced by flickering torches and the occasional howl of a hound that's either bored or possessed. You're heading toward the one place where flirtation is not only tolerated, but kind of expected, the feast. Tonight it's some minor holiday. You barely understand maybe something about a saint who survived a shipwreck by riding a pig. Doesn't matter. What matters is there's food, music, and dancing. And for once, you're allowed to look at someone without pretending you're just admiring their turnips. Feasts are sensory overloads. Smoke from the fire pit curls into the air, the scent of roasting meat heavy around you. Someone's boiling ale with herbs again, and the result smells like ambition and socks. Children dart between legs. Grandmothers shout over each other. Somewhere a pig squeals in protest it was invited to dinner, but not as a guest. You find a spot near the edge where benches line long wooden tables. Everyone's packed in tight, jostling elbows and sharing trenchers, thick slices of stale bread used as plates. The food's simple but hearty: stewed beans, mystery meat pies, cabbage boiled into submission. You eat, you nod at familiar faces. You look for her, and there she is, the baker's daughter, sitting with her family, laughing, sipping watered wine from a clay cup. You can't approach just yet, that would be forward. Instead, you try not to look too often. You fail. Her mother notices. Great. But there's hope. The music starts. This is your chance. Medieval dancing is both extremely structured and completely chaotic. There's the farandole, where you all hold hands and snake through the village like a conga line with rhythm issues. Or the branle, a side-to-side step, so repetitive it puts half the dancers into a trance. The goal isn't to look cool, it's to survive without stepping on too many toes. And during these dances, you're allowed to touch, briefly, delicately. It's an absolute scandal if you hold hands too long or, heaven forbid, smile while doing it. But those tiny, fluttery seconds are everything. You step into the line, nerves buzzing. Your palms are sweaty. You wipe them on your tunic and hope it's not obvious. The music picks up a pipe, a drum, someone enthusiastically clapping off beat. She joins the dance. And suddenly, you're moving toward each other, then apart, then spinning past someone's uncle, then back again. It's a blur. But for one perfect moment, your hands meet. You grip her fingers gently, and she squeezes back just once before twirling away. Historians still argue whether these dances were serious courtship rituals or just a way to burn off energy and cabbage-fueled gas. But letters from the period hint at couples who remembered exactly how it felt to touch hands during the harvest branle of 78. You dance until your legs ache, then you collapse onto a bench and guzzle watered wine like it's the elixir of life. The baker's daughter sits nearby now, fanning herself with a folded napkin. You muster courage and say something clever about how the music sounded like a goose being tickled. She laughs. Maybe she's just being polite. Maybe you're hilarious. Either way, the sparks are still there. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villages had apple dances where young women would give apples to the men they fancied. The twist. The apples were often marked with tiny carvings or initials, so if you got an unmarked apple, oof, brutal. It's like getting left on red, but with fruit. You look around. Someone's already passed out in a cider barrel. A child is chasing a goose with a spoon. Two grandmothers are arguing about who danced better back in their day. Everything's loud and lopsided and glowing. And then she says your name, just once, softly, like it's been waiting all evening to come out. You turn heart clanging harder than the drummer who just dropped his stick. She asks if you'll walk her home when the feast ends. You nod, managing not to choke on your own spit. Progress. As the night wears down, the music slows. A final dance more swaying than stepping. You don't hold hands this time. You walk beside her shoulders, almost touching, sharing quiet looks and crooked smiles. You talk about bread goats, how terrible the music was, how nice the stars look tonight. Historians still debate how serious these feast night flirtations were. Some ended in marriage, others ended in awkwardness and avoided eye contact at church. But in this moment, under this moon, with the embers glowing and a piece of turnip stuck to your boot, you feel like anything's possible. You walk her to her cottage. She thanks you. And then in the tiniest voice, she says she hopes to see you again soon. You mumble something incoherent and probably very uncool, but it doesn't matter. She smiles, and then she's gone inside behind a wooden door that still smells faintly of bread. You stand there for a second, grinning like an idiot. Then the pig you forgot about charges past, steals someone's shoe, and disappears into the dark. Romance may not be simple or clean or even particularly elegant, but tonight it felt like something real. You wake the next morning with a slight headache, probably from too much watered wine or too many stolen glances. The village is quieter today, nursing its collective feast hangover. A few folks stagger toward the church for early mass eyes, glazed tunics, wrinkled souls arguably intact. You meanwhile are replaying every second of last night like it's a minstrel's ballad on repeat. She smiled. She asked you to walk her home. You're practically a bard-worthy tale at this point. But now comes the trickiest part, figuring out what this all means. In medieval times, relationships don't flow on some smooth swipe right to wedding trajectory. They're more like a lumpy stew, slow to develop, full of questionable surprises, and occasionally containing a bone. You may have flirted, danced, and walked her home, but that doesn't mean you're halfway to the altar. It means you're under observation now, because courtship, it's a team sport. It involves family neighbors, your village priest, and sometimes a cow. And while your heart may be fluttering like a pigeon trapped in the belfry, your next move has to be strategic. Enter phase 2, the slow, suspicious march toward consent. In most peasant communities, there's no elaborate proposal. You don't kneel in the mud with a ring made of carrot. What you do is start showing up regularly, helping her father stack firewood, offering to repair a fence, maybe even joining her family for supper. Congratulations, you're being vetted. You arrive at the baker's shop with a very unconvincing excuse about buying something crusty. Her father gives you a long look. Her little brother is there too, holding a half-eaten bun and radiating pure chaos. You ask about the weather. Classic move. She says it's cloudy. You nod like she just recited poetry. Then comes the family interview, unofficial but intense. Her father asks how many pigs your family has. Her mother wants to know if your aunt still owes that bread debt from last spring. It's not about romance. It's about your reliability, your prospects, and whether you snore. Historians still argue whether peasants had full freedom in choosing a spouse. Some evidence suggests many couples had real say in the matter. Others point to strong family influence, especially when property or livestock were involved. Either way, you're not proposing yet. You're just proving you're not useless. To strengthen your case, you help her gather kindling. You try to carry a giant bundle like it's no big deal, but end up with twigs in your hair and a suspicious splinter in your ear. She laughs, not mockingly, just amused. You consider this a win, a quirky tidbit. Some regions believed that if two young people fetched water from the same well at dawn, it was a sign they'd be married within a year. So when you show up early one morning and she's already there, you both freeze. She raises an eyebrow. You both pretend it's a coincidence. That night, you hear gossip. The village widow says she saw you two by the well. She tells the blacksmith, who tells the shepherd, who tells the dog, probably. The rumor is out you might be courting. This is where things get awkward. Now every move is scrutinized. If you glance at her during mass scandal, if you sit too close at supper whispers, if you don't talk to her for a few days, oh, no trouble already. You try to act casual. You try so hard you forget how to walk normally and trip over your own foot in the middle of the path. A chicken watches you with judgment. There's another complication competition. Another lad, taller, smugger, mysteriously good at carving spoons, starts hanging around. You catch him complimenting her bread. The nerve. You nod politely, but internally you're composing war poetry. The community isn't exactly helpful. Her uncle offers to test your grip strength. A neighbor keeps hinting that the other boy has a proper coat, not that patched up thing. Even your own cousin asks if you're sure you can afford a wife. You consider hiding in a hayloft for 3 weeks. But here's the thing, she keeps smiling at you. She offers you the first roll at supper. She corrects your clumsy Latin pronunciation during prayers, but gently. Thus tiny moments, they're what medieval courtship is built on. Shared work, small kindnesses, little shows of trust. Historians believe this stage could last months or even years, especially for peasants, where marriage meant pooling resources and surviving together. It wasn't about passion or drama. It was about compatibility, resilience, and whether you'd still be civil after 3 hours of cabbage planting. You offer to help bake one day. You've never baked. You confuse yeast with flour. You set the dough too close to the fire, and it mutates into a sentient lump. Her father calls it bold, but she laughs until she snorts, and her mother smiles for the first time. That night, you walk her home again. No hand-holding, just soft words and stargazing. She tells you about her dream of owning her own oven someday. You nod, already picturing it. The road to medieval love isn't paved with roses. It's muddied with chores, gossip, and trials by turnip. But somehow, it's all part of the dance. Days blend together, like stew in the cauldron, thick, warm, and slightly confusing. Each sunrise brings more work, more cautious conversations, more glances that you try to play cool, but which land somewhere between dreamy and indigestion. You and the baker's daughter are undeniably a thing now, though no one says it out loud. In fact, that's half the charm. Medieval love thrives in this wordless territory. You're not betrothed, but you're also not strangers. You're in that blurry space where a raised eyebrow from the village priest counts as official notice. Still, it's time to start thinking about the next stage of the game, the pre-marriage handshake known as the betrothal, or if you're feeling particularly old school, the hand fasting. Betrothal was a big deal, not quite as binding as marriage, but also not something you could shrug off like a wet sock. In some places, it was as serious as a legal contract, complete with witnesses and a promise to wed or else. Or else could mean fines, social disgrace, or your uncle losing half a pig. Now hand fasting. It's exactly what it sounds like. Your hands literally fastened together, sometimes with a ribbon, sometimes just holding for the length of a vow. Think of it as an ancient DTR. Define the relationship with decorative string. Historians still debate whether hand fasting counted as a full marriage or was more like an extended engagement. Some sources claim it lasted a year and a day. Others say it could make you legally married on the spot. Depends on the region, the church's mood, and whether the local scribe had been drinking. Today you've been invited to a neighbor's hand fasting. It's not exactly a wedding, but it's definitely festive. There's mead flowers and a sheep with suspiciously braided wool. You watch carefully because if things keep going well, this could be your future. The couple stands before the village priest, or in this case, old Mira, who doubles as a midwife and officiant. She ties their wrists gently with a woven band and leads them in a simple vow they promise to remain faithful and prepare for marriage. Then there's cheering dancing and the awkward part where they're expected to share a cup of ale without untying their hands. You glance at the baker's daughter. She's watching too, her eyes soft and thoughtful. Later, you mention that the sheep looked annoyed. She laughs, then goes quiet. That night, you walk her home again. She pauses at her door and says, "I wonder what kind of ribbon I'd choose." Your heart drops into your shoes like a rogue pebble. You nod, but your brain is screaming something like blue, silk, whatever you want. A quirky fact. In some parts of Britain, couples used knotted cords to test the strength of their bond, literally. If the knot stayed tight after the vow, the match was strong. If it unraveled, oof. That's medieval divorce paperwork right there. So what do you do next? You start making quiet preparations. First, you talk to your parents. Awkward, but necessary. Your mother nods slowly and asks if she's clever with eggs. Your father grunts something about dowries and then continues repairing a fence with the intensity of a man avoiding feelings. Second, you ask your uncle, who knows a thing or two about deals and drama, how to begin formal betrothal talks. He launches into a rant about his first wife, a goat named Brindle, and somehow ends with unsolicited advice about foot hygiene. You take notes, mostly about what not to say. Finally, you make the gesture of visit to her home, not for bread, not for a laugh, but for a real sit-down conversation. You arrive with modest gifts, some honey, a few fresh herbs, and for flair, a hand-carved spoon. You stole the idea from your rival. Petty, yes. Effective, also, yes. Her parents are surprisingly warm. They sit you down, offer cider, and ask only one question. Are you serious? You say yes. You mean it. Within a week, it's settled. A betrothal date is set simple and small, with only close kin and enough formality to make it real. You're hand-fasted in the field, near the stream beneath a crooked willow tree. Your hands are wrapped in ribbon, red and gold her choice. The breeze carries the scent of earth and pine. You speak the words, you meet her eyes, and for a moment the entire world softens. Afterward, there's a modest celebration, dried fruit, a bit of cheese, a small dance, and one overexcited toddler who eats a beeswax candle. You're now officially almost married. Not that it stops the gossip. Someone says the knot looked too loose. Someone else says you didn't smile enough. One older woman declares your hand-holding lacked oomph, but none of that matters. You walk her home that night as the stars bloom overhead. Your hands are no longer bound, but they brush occasionally as you walk. She asks if you'll build a new oven someday. You say yes, and just like that two ordinary villagers, in a world of cabbage and chickens, you step forward together, hand-fasted by thread, by vow, and maybe, just maybe, by love. The day after your hand-fasting, you wake up with the weirdest feeling in your chest. It's not anxiety, not exactly. It's more like awareness. You're still the same person. You still have chores, still wear a tunic that smells vaguely of barley. But now there's this invisible cord tied between you and someone else, like you're hauling your lives closer together with each passing sunrise. And now comes the pre-marriage stage, otherwise known as hurry up and prove you're competent. See, being hand-fasted is like putting your relationship on layaway. You're not married yet, but you're committed. There's still work to be done, literal work. Because unless you're nobles, there's no hall full of silk or grand processions with lutes and roasted peacocks. Your marriage will be based on whether you can say thatch a roof and not cry during hay season. So you start preparing. The first order of business, a place to live. Medieval newlyweds don't always get their own house right away. Sometimes you move into a corner of your parents' home, snug, loud, and full of unsolicited advice. Other times, you build a small cottage from scratch, which sounds romantic until you realize it involves mud logs and approximately 4,000 splinters. You opt for the latter. Why? Because you want to impress her. And maybe because your younger brother has started singing everything he does in rhyme, and if you have to hear him chant, I'm milking the cow now. Wow, one more time, you'll dig a hole and live in that instead. You borrow tools, gather timber, and begin. The cottage won't be big, just one room and a hearth, but it's yours. You imagine where the bread oven will go, where she might dry herbs, where your boots will live, and probably develop their own ecosystem. She visits sometimes, bringing you bread and gently teasing your attempts at carpentry. You pretend not to notice when she traces the frame with her fingers, like she's already imagining a future inside. A quirky tidbit: in some villages, couples were allowed to spend time alone in their future home before the wedding under supervision, of course, like a medieval chaperoned Airbnb. The idea was to ensure they got along before making things official. One priest famously declared that sharing a hearth without fighting was a better test of compatibility than any sermon. You keep building. The roof leaks. You fix it. The door sticks. You fix it. You hammer your thumb. You don't fix it, but you do get sympathy points. Meanwhile, both families are talking about dates' dowries, who's bringing what, and whether your aunt's prized duck will be sacrificed for the feast. There's no wedding planner, no linen samples, no bouquet toss. There's just a village, some ale, and an enthusiastic goat who keeps wandering into your cottage. One afternoon, your future mother-in-law pulls you aside. She hands you a bundle of linens, hand-spun, carefully stitched, surprisingly floral. "You'll need these," she says, looking you up and down, like you might need help figuring out which end is the pillow. This is her way of saying welcome, and also don't mess this up. Historians still argue whether peasant weddings were community events or quiet affairs. Some records suggest massive celebrations that included the entire village. Others mention simple church blessings, followed by supper and maybe a song or two. It really depended on how many chickens you were willing to part with. You and your betrothed. You're aiming for somewhere in the middle, a little dancing, a little drinking, enough joy to remember it forever, but not so much chaos that you lose a relative in the soup. Then comes the talk. Not that talk, please. You live in a society where the church has opinions on everything, from candle placement to where your soul will go if you kiss for too long. No, this talk is about money, specifically the dowry. In medieval Europe, the dowry was a kind of marriage starter pack, items, land, or animals the bride's family gave to the groom to support the new household. In some cases, it was modest: a few blankets, a cow, a little silver if you were lucky. In others, it was the difference between comfort and cabbage soup every night. You sit with her father, a stone-faced man who treats flour like a sacred substance. He mentions a small herd of goats, a handful of coin, some prized tools. You nod respectfully, even though you're internally panicking about how many goats it takes to seem worthy. 712, infinity. Then he says something you don't expect. "She chose you," he says quietly, "so make sure she never regrets it." You nod again, slower this time. He's not threatening you exactly, but if goats could glare, you suspect his would. A few days later, she surprises you with a gift: a wooden spoon. Not just any spoon, your spoon. The one you carved weeks ago, slightly crooked, and now lovingly sanded smooth. "For our kitchen," she says. You hold it like it's made of gold. The village knows the wedding is coming. People start dropping by with unsolicited advice and questions like, "Have you chosen your Sunday boots? And is it true you're making stew with 3 kinds of beans?" One old man tells you not to sneeze during the ceremony. It's bad luck. Another says, "It's good luck if you sneeze facing west." You start practicing diagonal sneezing just to be safe. As the cottage nears completion, you realize something: this life you're building. It's messy. It's humble, but it's real. You spend one last night alone inside the half-finished house. The walls creak, the wind whistles through the rafters, and the stars blink sleepily above. You curl up near the hearth and imagine laughter in this space, warm bread, bare feet, a name spoken softly in the dark. The wedding is close now, and your heart, once timid and uncertain, is marching toward it, like it knows exactly what it's doing. Your wedding day begins not with trumpets or flower petals, but with a knock on the cottage door and a neighbor yelling, "You better be up. The cheese is already sweating." That's how it goes in medieval times. No coordinators, no color themes, just a flurry of activity, the smell of roasting meat, and a deep communal need to eat, dance, and gossip all in one place. You rise groggily, splash your face with cold water, and try to look slightly less like someone who's been sleeping next to unfinished wall beams. Your brother barges in, holding your best tunic, which based on its scent may have been stored next to the turnip barrel. Still today is your day. The cottage is cleaned. The neighbors have swept the common path. Your uncle is already drunk on mead and singing something deeply inappropriate to the village cat. And somewhere nearby, the baker's daughter, your betrothed, is dressing with help from her sister's cousins and aunts, each of whom is loudly offering opinions about braids, aprons, and whether red ribbon is too suggestive. Across the village green, you try not to pace. The priest is late. Your palms are sweaty. One of your guests has brought a goose. You suspect it's a gift. You hope it's not a date. Weddings in the medieval world could be surprisingly casual or wildly chaotic. For peasants like you, the essentials were simple consent. Yep, even back then, vows spoken in public, and some form of priestly or communal blessing. The church had started insisting on formal ceremonies by the 13th century, but village folk still liked to sprinkle in a few older pagan customs too, just in case. A quirky historical tidbit: in some areas of Europe, couples married by simply declaring their vows in front of witnesses no church needed. This was called verba de presenti, words in the present tense. Say the right words the right way, and poof, you're married. It was legally binding, and trying to undo it afterward was about as easy as unbaking a pie. Finally, she arrives. She's wearing a simple linen dress, cinched with a belt, embroidered by her grandmother. Her hair is braided and crowned with herbs rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, and just a touch of lavender, so she smells like a medieval sachet. Her eyes meet yours, and for a moment the goose honking in the background disappears. The ceremony begins. You stand before the priest, who's now here and slightly winded from chasing one of your cousins away from the cider keg. He opens a tattered book and begins the rites. Latin mixes with the drone of bees. The villagers fall into an unusually respectful hush, except your uncle, who's muttering something about a chicken. The vows are short but powerful. You each declare your intent. You promise to love, to provide, to protect, to honor, and most importantly, to share everything from bread to bedding. The priest wraps a strip of cloth around your joined hands. It's your second hand fasting, but this one seals the deal. A final knot, a final promise. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant weddings were deeply romantic or mostly practical alliances. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Yes, they were about survival, but also people have always wanted love, messy, warm, ridiculous love, even when it comes with muddy shoes and a shared bed that squeaks every time you breathe. The priest gives the blessing, the cloth is removed, and just like that, you're married. And now, the real party begins. Feasting in the Middle Ages is equal parts celebration and endurance test. You're expected to eat, drink, dance, and act like you've never heard the word moderation. There's venison stew, spiced apples, cheese wrapped in leaves, loaves of bread as big as your face, and ale, so much ale. Your cousin drops a ladle into a barrel and declares it a sign. No one is sure what of. You share your first meal as husband and wife on a shared wooden plate. You take turns tearing bread and feeding each other, laughing at how badly you miss your own mouths. The village musicians strike up a tune with fiddles and flutes, one of them suspiciously made from a hollow turnip, and the dancing begins. Someone pulls you into a line dance, then another, then another. You lose track of time, your feet sore, and your tunic slowly unbuttoning itself out of protest. You notice your wife, spinning in a circle, hair coming undone, laughing in a way that fills your chest with something light and breathless. And then comes the final rite, the bedding. This part gets talked about a lot sometimes, with giggles, sometimes with wide eyes. In some traditions, the newlyweds were escorted to their chamber with a torchlit procession complete with songs and very specific advice. In others, the community just made sure you got to the room and closed the door. What happened next was your business. You're spared the torch parade, thankfully, but your mother insists on sprinkling dried lavender near your bed, and your new father-in-law quietly hands you a bundle of garlic to ward off wicked spirits. You're not sure if he means ghosts or in-laws. You enter the cottage. It smells of wood smoke and honey. She follows quiet, calm, but with a look in her eyes that says, "This is our space now." You close the door. Outside, the party continues. Laughter, music, one fight over whether the soup was too adventurous. Inside, there's silence. You sit by the hearth. She joins you, curling her feet under her. You say something about the dancing. She says something about the goose. The moment stretches, and then she rests her head on your shoulder. It's not perfect. The cottage is still unfinished in places. The bed creaks. You think the cat may have hidden a dead mouse under the table, but it's yours. It's real. And tonight, you're not just surviving the medieval world, you're living in it together. Morning comes with the gentle clatter of chickens and someone outside shouting about missing boots. You wake up wrapped in a wool blanket, her breath soft against your neck, the fire nothing but a faint glow of embers. For a moment, the world is still. No chores, no markets, no goats attempting to climb the roof. Just warmth, but not for long. Marriage in the medieval world doesn't come with a honeymoon unless you count a week of slightly less weeding and only mild pestering from your in-laws. You're back to work almost immediately. And now, everything you do together. First thing, breakfast. She rises before you, already moving like she's part of the house itself. She's baking something coarse bread with bits of dried apple. You help by chopping wood, although mostly you just pretend you know the sharp side of the axe from the handle. She hums while she kneads, and you try to match her tune, though you land somewhere between village bard and goose with allergies. Then it's time to divide the day's labor. In medieval marriages, work wasn't just divided by gender, it was a full-on partnership. You both contribute, often side by side. Sure, she handles more of the domestic labor, baking, spinning, tending the herb garden, but she's also out helping with harvest wrangling animals, and once memorably knocking a drunk cousin into a trough with a single shove. Meanwhile, you're responsible for plowing, repairing tools, mending fences, and trying not to fall into the well again. And if you thought marriage might mean more alone time together, think again. Privacy in the medieval world is, let's call it, optional. Your home is one room, one shared space for sleeping, eating, working, and when the mood strikes, awkwardly pretending your neighbor can't hear everything through the thatch walls. Quirky detail in many peasant homes, livestock actually shared living quarters with the family. Cows, chickens, even pigs. It helped keep the house warm in winter and probably ensured you never forgot what a pig smells like. Your home, thankfully, only houses one rooster, currently banned to the porch, and the occasional very confused sheep. Despite the lack of modern comforts, something about this rhythm settles into your bones. You eat when the sun is high. You nap if you're lucky in short bursts. You attend church on holy days, feast with neighbors during festivals, and once a week you both visit the village bathhouse, which sounds fancy until you realize it's just a warm wooden tub shared by everyone and supervised by a woman named Agatha, who's been judging elbows for 40 years. Historians still argue whether marriage in medieval Europe was more about affection or survival. Documents show contracts, dowries, and land deals, but also poems, letters, and the occasional scandal involving bread stolen for love. The truth, probably both. You survive because you love, and you love because surviving is just slightly less miserable when there's someone to laugh with during a thunderstorm when your roof collapses. Again, you begin to learn things about her that you hadn't noticed before marriage, like how she always eats the crust first, or how she talks to plants like they're distant cousins, or how she secretly rearranges your tools after you hang them like a lunatic, as she puts it. You retaliate by hiding a turnip in her apron pocket. She retaliates by naming the turnip and setting it a place at the table. This is married life. One day you get sick. It's nothing serious, just a fever and some shivering, but in the medieval world, even minor illness can feel like a prelude to death. You lie in bed, sweating, muttering half-baked prayers, while she hovers with herbs cloths and the steely focus of a battlefield surgeon. She brews a tea so bitter, you briefly consider faking your death to avoid drinking it. She cools your forehead. She mutters, "You absolute fool," every time you try to stand. And when you drift off into uneasy dreams, she's still there whispering lullabies that smell like thyme and smoke. When you wake up, she's asleep on the floor beside you. You don't say anything. You just reach for her hand and squeeze it once. She squeezes back. Marriage is a collection of these moments, tiny threads that together form a tapestry. Most of it is plain. Some of it is brilliant. And a few spots are weird stains you don't talk about, but keep anyway. A few weeks later, she surprises you with a new cloak. It's made from thick wool, dyed a deep green with nettles. She says she traded for it, using her best pickled onions. You consider this the most romantic gesture in recorded history. You wear it everywhere. In return, you carve her a small box from ash wood. You spend hours etching tiny flowers into the lid, your tongue sticking out like a child. Inside, you place a comb and a single goose feather. She pretends not to cry. Then you both pretend the comb works better than it actually does. The seasons turn. You plant, you harvest, you prepare for winter together, salting meat and drying herbs, sealing the cottage against cold winds. On long nights, you talk about dreams, about the stars, about whether that weird rock near the creek is cursed. This isn't courtly love. There are no sonnets, no knights jousting for a glimpse of a handkerchief. But there is something stronger here, a quiet kind of devotion. The kind that sits with you when you're sick, pulls splinters from your hand, and tells jokes about cheese that aren't funny, but still make you laugh. The wedding may be over, but this is the real beginning. Months pass and you start to notice the subtle shifts in how people look at you. Not quite the same as before. There's a new respect, or maybe a new curiosity. When you walk through the village, folks nod in a different way, the children no longer tugging your sleeve to ask about the stray cat. You're a married man now, a status that carries its own weight. This change is both invisible and undeniable. Marriage in medieval times was as much a social contract as a personal one. You didn't just bind yourself to your spouse. You bonded families, neighbors, even whole communities. People expected certain behaviors, certain loyalties. You were now part of a unit that represented stability, responsibility, and well, at least the occasional decent stew. Your wife too feels this shift. Her laughter is quieter around certain elders, her words more measured when discussing the future. You catch her once, staring at the horizon, fingers tracing the lines of your home, like she's mapping out a plan you haven't heard yet. It's no secret that medieval marriage came with expectations and pressure. For women especially, their worth was often tied to one big thing: children. You hadn't really talked about it yet, but the whole village seems to have decided on your behalf that producing heirs is a priority. Mothers, aunts, and grannies drop by with herbal teas to encourage fertility, some of which taste suspiciously like swamp water. One of the stranger traditions is the use of so-called fertility charms. In some parts of Europe, couples carried tiny pouches filled with herbs, bits of bone, or even small carved figures. These charms were meant to promote conception and ward off evil spirits that might prevent pregnancy. You pocket one. Your wife made herself something about dried marigold and a tiny rabbit's foot and tried not to feel ridiculous. Historians still argue whether such practices were more superstition or early forms of medicine. What's clear is that medieval people like us desperately wanted control over the mysteries of life and love, and sometimes a little magic seemed like the best bet. One evening, as you sit by the fire, she touches your hand and whispers, "What if it takes time?" You nod. You've heard stories of women waiting years of heartbreak and hope tangled together, like weeds in a garden. The village healer warns that stress can keep the cradle empty. You joke that you should start meditating. She laughs, but you both know it's not really funny. Time stretches. You settle into routines, morning chores, midday meals, evening prayers. Sometimes you catch her staring at the cradle. You've crafted a tiny sturdy thing made from oak, ready and waiting. The days feel long. You fill them with work and song and hope, and you talk sometimes quietly, sometimes openly, about what family means to you both, whether it's just the two of you or more. You also begin to see the complex side of marriage, the negotiations, the unspoken compromises. She wants more time spinning wool. You want to build a fence around the garden. She dreams of a second room. You're worried about winter's cold and the food stores running low. It's not all romance and charm. There's tension, frustration, the kind of small arguments that build like clouds, but rarely burst into storms. You learn the art of patience, the slow dance of listening and letting go. One night, after a long day in the fields, you find her staring at the stars. "Do you think we'll ever understand all of this?" she asks. You smile because it's the same question you've been asking yourself. The world feels enormous and unknowable, yet here you are, two people bound together, trying to make sense of it. She rests her head on your shoulder, and you realize that whatever happens next, children or no children, feast or famine, you'll face it together. Because medieval love might be messy, uncertain, and sometimes downright inconvenient. But it's also real, and it's yours. As seasons cycle, you start to notice something that's been hovering at the edge of your new life. The village gossip mill, always humming now, spinning faster about you and your wife. You try to ignore it. After all, gossip has been the village's unofficial pastime since before the cobblestones were laid. But sometimes it slips in through the cracks, quiet murmurs at the well-exchanged glances during market days, and once horrifyingly a whispered rhyme about the couple who argue over turnips. Medieval marriage wasn't just a private affair, it was a public spectacle. Everyone had opinions on how you should live, love, and behave, and they weren't shy about sharing them. One peculiar tradition you stumble upon is the skipping bride. In some regions, if the bride wasn't deemed proper enough, she might be playfully, and sometimes not so playfully, lifted and carried around by her new husband's family to prove her worthiness or test her spirit. It sounds bizarre, but the idea was to confirm her strength, resilience, and sense of humor. You mentally prepare yourself, wondering if this will happen to your wife and if you'll be able to keep a straight face. Then there are the endless rules about conduct. You learn that a married woman must never show her ankles in public, considered scandalous in some villages. Also, husbands were expected to protect their wives' honor fiercely, which, while noble sounding, sometimes meant settling petty disputes with the village blacksmith over who gave the best beans. Your neighbor's eyes seem to watch you, constantly cataloging your every move. Did you greet your wife with enough affection? Did you bring her flowers, or just the usual turnip? Did you share your bread fairly? Was your laughter too loud, too quiet? These rules and judgments are exhausting, but they're the social glue of the village. Without them, society would probably fall apart. Or worse, people might start dancing on tables uninvited. You also discover some delightful superstitions tied to marriage. For example, in parts of England, couples were sometimes showered with peas or beans instead of rice after the ceremony, a practice believed to ensure fertility and prosperity. You try tossing peas at your wife one day, but she glares and tosses them right back, so you decide that one is better left in tradition rather than practice. Historians still argue whether these public displays and traditions empowered women or trapped them within rigid social roles. The truth is messy as always. While some customs reinforced control, others offered ways for couples and especially women, to assert their agency and humor in a world that demanded obedience. One afternoon, you overhear your wife laughing with the village midwife, sharing stories of marriage and childbirth, swapping remedies, and quietly plotting how to keep a few secrets from the elders. You realize marriage is not just a bond between two people. It's an entry into a complex living web of relationships, expectations, and stories. And through it all, you learn that sometimes surviving the gossip is just as important as surviving the plow. Winter arrives like a slow sigh settling thick and white over your village. The days grow shorter, the sun a timid visitor, barely brushing the horizon before retreating. You and your wife find yourselves indoors more often, the cold biting through layers of wool and leather. This season is both a challenge and a blessing. The cold forces you to slow down to spend evenings huddled near the hearth with a shared bowl of pottage, your breath fogging in the dim light. Outside, the wind howls through the thatch, but inside there's a quiet intimacy that you haven't quite felt before. Winter is also a test of your marriage's endurance. Food is scarcer, the woodpile must be carefully rationed, and every cough or sniffle brings a flicker of fear. Illness in medieval times is never trivial. A bad cold can turn into something far worse in the blink of an eye. You watch as your wife carefully tends the herbs she's dried through autumn, brewing teas and salves with the precision of an alchemist. Her hands are steady, even when yours tremble from the cold. There's an old belief that couples who sit together by the fire all winter will forge a bond stronger than steel. It feels true. You share stories by candlelight, some whispered, some loud enough to make the cat bolt for the rafters. One of the quirkiest medieval winter traditions you learn about is the first footing ritual. Right after midnight on New Year's Day, the first person to enter your home brings luck for the coming year, often a lump of coal, a bit of bread, or a small coin. You and your wife try to outdo each other with who can be the best first footer, culminating in you accidentally bringing in a sack of potatoes instead of coal. She doesn't let you live that one down. Historians still argue about how much these seasonal customs were religious rites versus practical superstitions born from the harshness of rural life. Either way, you come to appreciate the rhythm. They bring a sense of hope and renewal even in the coldest times. You and your wife talk long into the night about dreams for the future, building a bigger home, planning an orchard, maybe even starting a small market stall. These plans feel like seeds planted in frozen soil, promising growth when spring comes. But for now, you focus on the small things, mending clothes, repairing tools, listening to the crackle of the fire, and tracing her hand with your thumb. Outside the village, sleeps under a blanket of snow, the world hushed and still. Inside, your marriage feels like the warmest place on earth. Spring breaks through the cold with a stubborn persistence, just like your neighbor's endless debates about who owns the biggest turnip. You wake one morning to the scent of damp earth and fresh blossoms, the world suddenly bursting with color and possibility. The village is alive again, roosters crowing, children chasing after chickens, and the church bells ringing for morning prayers. Springtime is the season of renewal, and your marriage feels it too. You find yourself stepping outside more, your boots muddy but your heart lighter. You and your wife work the garden together, planting peas, beans, and herbs. Her fingers dig into the soil with the ease of someone born to it, while you try not to crush the seedlings as you follow her lead. One day, she teaches you how to weave wildflowers into a crown, a practice common among medieval maidens during spring festivals. You awkwardly try to make one for her, but it ends up looking more like a bird's nest with a few stubborn thorns. She laughs the sound ringing like a bell and crowns you the king of the weeds. Spring is also the time for festivals, and the village prepares for May Day with a mixture of excitement and exhaustion. There are dances around the maypole feasts of freshly baked bread and honey, and games that involve more mud than skill. You learn about a quirky tradition, the Jack in the Green, a figure clad in leaves and flowers who leads the procession, symbolizing the spirit of the season. Villagers don costumes and masks, turning the whole event into a sort of medieval Mardi Gras. You both join in laughing until your sides ache and the sun dips low. Historians still argue whether these spring festivals were originally pagan rituals or early Christian celebrations rebranded to fit the church calendar. Either way, they're a joyful break from the hard work of daily life. Amidst the festivities, you catch glimpses of your wife's old self, the young woman who once dreamed of distant lands and wild adventures. She tells you stories of the tales she heard as a child of heroes and saints, witches, and wise women. You realize that marriage hasn't dulled her spirit. It's given her new roots to grow from. One evening, as you walk back from the fields, she stops and points to the stars. "Look," she says, "Orion is back." You smile, thinking about how constellations guided travelers and lovers alike in medieval times. Maybe your journey is just beginning. The village awakens fully now, bursting with the fresh energy of spring's promise. Birds chatter as if gossiping about the latest barnyard escapades, and the smell of damp moss mingles with the sweet fragrance of blooming hawthorn. Your hands are stained with dirt, but your heart feels strangely light, as if the earth itself is breathing new life into you. Your wife has taken to waking earlier, slipping out to check on the herbs and seedlings before the sun has fully risen. You follow behind, trying to remember which seeds go where, and silently vowing not to accidentally water the compost heap again. There's a rhythm to this season, one of planting, tending, and waiting that somehow mirrors your own marriage. You don't always know what the future holds, but together you nurture it carefully, hoping for growth. You learn of a curious custom tied to the spring sowing. In some villages, newlywed couples were expected to plant a love tree or a special patch of garden as a symbol of their union and hopes for fertility. It's a sweet idea, even if the tree you plant ends up being a stubborn little crabapple that you both swear will grow tall and strong. Meanwhile, the village buzzes with preparations for the Pentecost feast, a major celebration filled with music, dancing, and more food than anyone can reasonably eat. You help build decorations from wildflowers and ribbons, watching as the community's collective joy feels like a healing balm after the harsh winter months. Historians still argue about how much medieval marriages were about affection versus obligation. But in moments like this, with laughter ringing through the village square and your wife's hand warming yours, it's hard to separate the two. You steal a moment under the shade of a blossoming tree, and she leans in close, whispering about a tale she heard a clever heroine who outwitted a jealous lord. You realize your own story is unfolding, less grand but no less meaningful. Spring is a season of beginnings, and as the earth turns green again, so do your hopes, tangled with wildflowers and whispered dreams. Summer sneaks up like a warm whisper, wrapping the village in golden light and the scent of freshly cut hay. The days stretch long and lazy, and you find yourself waking before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing, the cool morning air buzzing with promise. Your wife moves through the fields with practiced grace, her hands skilled in the age-old dance of harvest. You try to keep pace, occasionally tripping over a stubborn root or losing a basket of herbs to the ground. She laughs at you, a sound bright enough to rival the sun itself. Medieval summers were a time of hard work, but also celebration. After weeks of tending crops and chasing weeds, the community comes together for harvest festivals, loud, messy affairs full of dancing music and feasting on the season's bounty. You learn about the tradition of wassailing, where villagers sing to their apple trees to ward off evil spirits and ensure a good harvest. One night, you and your wife join the procession, holding mugs of warm spiced cider and chanting along with your neighbors under the starlit sky. There's also the curious medieval belief that couples who danced together at these festivals were blessed with happiness and fertility, a tradition you're more than happy to participate in, especially since it involves a lot less manual labor and a lot more twirling. Historians still debate whether these rites were primarily pagan holdovers or clever adaptations by the church to incorporate local customs. Either way, the spirit of community and joy is undeniable. As the sun dips low, you sit together on a grassy hill watching fireflies flicker like tiny lanterns in the dusk. Your wife rests her head on your shoulder, and for a moment the worries of the world, the crops, the gossip, the endless expectations fade into the background. You realize that marriage in medieval times, with all its quirks and challenges, is about finding light in the everyday moments, like a shared smile, a warm hand, a dance beneath the stars, and somehow that feels enough. The heat of summer deepens, settling like a heavy cloak over the village. The air shimmers with the hum of bees and the steady drone of cicadas, and every breath tastes faintly of honey and dust. You and your wife find refuge in the shade of the old oak tree, its leaves rustling like whispered secrets above you. Summer is also the time when the village's social web grows most tangled. Markets bustle with travelers, and traders' news, and rumors flowing as freely as the mead. You overhear conversations about distant wars and royal scandals, but closer to home, it's the small dramas of daily life that hold everyone's attention, who's courting whom, who's taken ill, and who's been caught sneaking an extra slice of bread. You learn about the tradition of courtly love through a traveling minstrel who visits the village. His songs tell of knights and noble ladies, their love often more poetic than practical. You can't help but think how different this is from your own marriage, less about grand gestures and more about shared toil and quiet companionship. Still, the idea of love as a noble quest has a certain charm. The minstrel mentions how knights would sometimes carry tokens from their beloveds into battle, a practice that seems both romantic and utterly terrifying. You joke to your wife that if you ever had to fight a dragon, you'd want her to throw you a sturdy loaf of bread instead of a delicate scarf. Historians still argue about how widespread courtly love really was among common folk. Was it a lofty ideal, or did it seep into everyday life in surprising ways? Either way, the stories offer a glimpse of how people in medieval times dreamed about love, sometimes far beyond their own circumstances. That summer, you and your wife start a small tradition of your own. Each evening, you share a story, one from your childhood or something you've heard in the village. These moments become a gentle ritual, a way to connect beyond the routine of work and survival. And as the days grow long and warm, you realize that love in medieval times isn't just about grand battles or public ceremonies. It's also about the quiet moments beneath the oak tree where the world seems soft and endless. Late summer fades slowly into early autumn, bringing a softness to the light that feels almost magical. The harvest moon hangs low and golden, casting long shadows across the fields where you and your wife have worked side by side. There's a gentle satisfaction in the air, a quiet pride in the fruits of your labor, both in the fields and in your life together. As the crops are gathered and stored, the village prepares for the autumn festivals, a time to give thanks and enjoy one last burst of community before winter's hush. You help build a massive bonfire in the village square, its flames promising warmth and light against the coming cold. One of the more curious medieval customs during this time is the tradition of apple wassailing, where villagers sing to their orchards, toast the trees with cider, and sprinkle toast soaked in cider in the branches to encourage a bountiful harvest next year. You and your wife join in the singing your voices, mingling with others under the starlit sky, feeling oddly connected to the ancient rhythm of life and land. You also learn about the medieval belief that certain days in autumn were particularly lucky or unlucky for marriage and conception. Couples were sometimes encouraged to time these life events according to the phases of the moon or the church calendar, a reminder of how intertwined love and faith were in daily life. Historians still argue how much medieval people truly believed in these superstitions versus how much they followed them out of tradition or social pressure. What's clear is that these customs gave people a sense of control and hope in a world often ruled by uncertainty. At home, the air grows cooler and you and your wife start preparing the house for winter. She teaches you how to weave rushes into mats to keep the floor warm and shares stories about the importance of hearth magic, small charms, and rituals meant to protect the home and family. You watch her move through these preparations with a quiet grace, and you realize that marriage in medieval times was as much about building a shared life as it was about love crafting a sanctuary in a world that could be unpredictable and harsh. And as the bonfire crackles and the village sings around you, you feel that in this moment, everything is exactly as it should be. As autumn deepens, the days shorten, and the chill in the air grows sharper. You find yourself drawn more frequently to the village hearth. It's the heart of the home, where stories are spun like fine thread, and the flickering flames offer a kind of quiet comfort against the creeping cold. Your wife becomes the keeper of these stories, weaving tales of saints and sinners, heroes and fools, mixing history with legend in a way that keeps you both entranced. You learn about the fascinating medieval practice of telling tales by the fire, where families and neighbors would gather in the evenings, sharing stories that taught lessons, passed down traditions, or simply offered a moment of escape. One story she tells you is about the green man, a mysterious figure whose face is made of leaves and vines said to symbolize nature's rebirth. You find it oddly comforting, an ancient reminder that no matter how harsh the winter life will bloom again. You also discover that some medieval couples wrote love letters, often in secret, using coded language and symbols to express feelings that might not have been safe or socially acceptable to say aloud. The idea of these hidden messages tucked away in worn parchment fascinates you. You think about writing one to your wife, though you're not sure if your handwriting could ever be mistaken for anything romantic. Historians still debate how widespread the practice of love letters was among common folk. Were they a rare luxury or a cherished norm? What's certain is that these small acts of affection, private and quiet, helped keep the spark alive amidst the challenges of daily life. You notice how your own conversations have deepened from practical matters to shared dreams and secret hopes. There's a new tenderness in her glance, and you feel it too, a bond strengthened by seasons past and stories shared. The village feels quieter now as everyone settles into the rhythm of shortening days and longer nights. Outside, the trees shed their last leaves and the first frost kisses the ground. But inside, by the fire's warm glow, you and your wife hold on to the stories, the laughter, and the unspoken promises that knit your lives together. Winter's return is harsher than you expected, the wind slicing through the village like a sharp blade. The world outside is a monochrome of white and gray fields buried under heavy snow, and the sky often a dull, unbroken slate. You trudge through icy paths, boots crunching on frozen ground, wondering how people manage to survive these endless cold spells without central heating or hot showers. Inside, your wife tends the fire with ritual precision, coaxing warmth from stubborn logs and filling the room with the scent of burning pine and dried herbs. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and you both settle into a quiet routine of mending clothes, preparing meals, and sharing stories to keep the biting loneliness at bay. You learn about the medieval practice of Yule, a festival blending Christian and pagan traditions celebrated around the winter solstice. It involves feasting, gift-giving, and rituals meant to chase away the darkness. Villagers might burn a Yule log believed to bring luck and protection for the year ahead. You and your wife try this one year, dragging a heavy oak branch into the hearth and watching sparks fly like tiny stars. Oddly enough, there's a quirky superstition tied to Yule. Whoever finds the hidden Yule goat made of straw will have good fortune. One year, you accidentally knock it over, and your wife teases you, mercilessly calling you the goat bringer of doom. It's a small moment, but it feels like a thread stitching your lives closer together. Historians still debate how much medieval Yule traditions influenced modern Christmas customs. Was it a smooth transformation or a cultural tug-of-war? The details may be fuzzy, but the sense of community and hope in the darkest months remains clear. As you huddle together by the fire, the outside world frozen and unforgiving, you realize that medieval marriage was not just about surviving the seasons. It was about finding warmth, trust, and laughter in the coldest times. And maybe that's the kind of love worth holding on to. The long winter nights stretch endlessly, inviting quiet reflection as you and your wife settle into the slow rhythm of days lit only by candle and hearth. The cold keeps the village close, neighbors trade visits, and gossip sharing what little warmth they can. The muffled crunch of snow outside becomes a steady heartbeat in the background, lulling you into a cozy kind of silence. Medieval winter evenings were prime time for spinning tales, knitting, and surprisingly matchmaking. In some villages, young people would gather indoors for mumming performances, simple plays, or dances, often filled with humor and flirtation. It's a quirky tradition that feels almost like an early dating scene, where glances and smiles spoke louder than words. You imagine how awkward it must have been for the teens' sneaking looks while trying to remember their lines, the room buzzing with nervous energy. You joke with your wife that you'd be terrible at it, probably forgetting everything and tripping over your own feet. There's also the tradition of charmers folk, believed to have the power to protect marriages and homes through spoken spells or herbal concoctions. Your wife's knowledge of herbs and remedies connects you both to this ancient practice, blending superstition with love and care. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or confined to specific regions and social classes. What's clear is that people found creative ways to foster connection and hope during the darkest times. You begin to see your marriage not just as a bond between two people, but as a small community built on trust, shared stories, and a few secret jokes that only you two understand. In the quiet glow of the fire, you hold her hand a little tighter, thankful for this simple, imperfect love that feels as enduring as the seasons themselves. Winter deepens, and the village's heartbeat slows into a gentle, steady thrum. The cold doesn't just bite, it teaches patience. You find yourself waking to the soft crunch of frost on the roof and the faint glow of dawn breaking through frosted windows. Inside your humble home, you and your wife create a small world against the cold, knitting woolen socks, mending worn clothes, and sharing quiet moments by the flickering firelight. You're both reminded of the medieval notion that marriage was a partnership built on practical care as much as affection. You discover a curious tradition. Medieval couples sometimes exchanged posies or small bouquets of fragrant herbs and flowers, not just as romantic gestures, but also as talismans against illness, quite a sensible idea when winter brought sickness like a shadow. Your wife hands you a tiny bundle of lavender and rosemary, explaining their calming and protective properties. There's a lightness in this small ritual, a reminder that love in medieval times wasn't only about grand displays, but about small acts that said, "I'm here, I care." Meanwhile, the village prepares for Candlemas, a festival marking the halfway point between winter solstice and spring, when candles are blessed and homes are cleaned to welcome the light. You help your wife clean and decorate, feeling the symbolic power of brightening the dark days ahead. Historians still debate how much medieval people understood the deeper meanings of such festivals versus simply following tradition. Either way, the communal rituals bring a welcome sense of hope and renewal. You notice how these small traditions stitch your lives together, weaving practical care with spiritual comfort. Your marriage, much like the village, feels like a fragile but beautiful tapestry, strengthened by shared rituals, stories, and quiet moments of trust. And as winter's chill lingers, you hold on to the warmth growing between you both, knowing it's the true hearth that will carry you through. The thaw begins quietly slow enough that you almost miss it. Frosty mornings give way to soft drizzles, and the once rigid frozen ground starts to sigh under the weight of new life. You feel it too, a gentle stirring inside, like the earth waking from a long nap. As the village sheds its heavy winter coat, you notice how your own marriage feels lighter, less burdened by the chill of hardship. Your wife steps outside more often now, her face turned toward the weak spring sun, and you join her savoring the warmth as if it were a rare treasure. In medieval times, this transition was marked by festivals like St. George's Day, where nights were celebrated and love was often publicly acknowledged. The symbolism of St. George slaying the dragon wasn't just about heroics. It was about conquering inner fears and embracing new beginnings. You joke that if you had a dragon, it'd probably be the laundry pile, but your wife just smiles. You also learn about the curious medieval custom of hand-fasting, a kind of trial marriage, lasting a year and a day. It was a way for couples to test their compatibility before making a lifelong commitment, sort of like medieval dating, with a serious twist. Imagine explaining that to your modern friends. Historians still argue about how common hand-fasting really was, or whether it was more of a romanticized ideal. But the concept itself speaks to the complexities of medieval relationships, not always rigid, sometimes surprisingly pragmatic. You find yourself reflecting on your own journey, the struggles and triumphs, the silent promises and shared dreams. And as the village awakens with the season, so does your hope that no matter what, you and your wife will grow through whatever comes next. The cycle turns, and with it, your story continues rooted in the past, but reaching toward the future. Spring edges closer to summer, and the village pulses with new energy, buzzing bees, blooming flowers, and the fresh green of young leaves everywhere you look. You breathe in the scent of wild herbs and damp earth, feeling the world stretch and yawn awake after its long winter nap. Your wife spends mornings gathering fresh water from the well, humming an old tune you've come to love, and you follow behind carrying baskets of garden produce. Together you tend to the small patch of vegetables you planted last season, marveling at how something so fragile can thrive with just a little care. You hear whispers of medieval springtime courtship rituals, like May Day celebrations, where young people danced around maypoles, exchanged garlands, and sometimes, just sometimes, stole secret kisses under the budding trees. It sounds like an ancient version of your modern awkward first dates, except with more flowers and less texting. One quirky detail you uncover is the belief that certain flowers had special powers: daisies for innocence, violets for modesty, and hawthorn blossoms thought to protect lovers from evil spells. Your wife laughs when you pick a handful of wildflowers and try to fashion a garland, but she lets you wear it anyway. Historians still argue about how much medieval peasants actually followed these traditions, or whether they were mainly the domain of the nobility. But regardless, the spirit of hope and renewal permeates the air, touching everyone. You realize how much the seasons shape not just the land, but your own rhythms, the way love work and community ebb and flow with the turning year. As the sun warms your face and the village bursts into song and laughter, you feel a quiet certainty that this fragile, complicated medieval world was in its own way full of life and love, not so different from your own. The early summer days roll in warm and slow, the air thick with the scent of wildflowers and fresh-cut grass. You find yourself waking early, the morning light spilling through your window like a gentle invitation to start the day. Your wife's laughter floats to you from the kitchen, mixing with the soft clatter of pots and the occasional chirp of birds. You walk through the village, noticing how everyone seems lighter in spirit. The long, dark days are behind, and the promise of abundance is everywhere. Children chase each other through fields, their carefree giggles weaving through the hum of bees and the rustling of leaves. Medieval marriage customs during this season often included feasts and public blessings, celebrating fertility and the hope for prosperous families. You learn about the churching of women, a ceremony marking a woman's return to the community after childbirth, which, despite its solemnity, was also a cause for joy and social gathering. There's a quirky detail: some couples would carry love tokens, small charms, or coins exchanged as promises of faithfulness. You imagine hiding one in your wife's apron pocket, a secret reminder of your bond amid the bustle of daily life. Historians still debate how much these church rituals shaped personal relationships versus reinforcing social expectations. Either way, the ceremonies offered moments of communal support and recognition, something you find comforting. As the sun dips low in the sky, you and your wife join a gathering near the village green, where music and dancing unfold beneath strings of wildflowers. You feel the old tensions melt away in the warm evening air, replaced by something simple and true. In this season of growth and light, you understand that medieval love, like the land itself, is about patience, resilience, and the quiet joy of shared moments. The summer sun climbs high and relentless, painting the village in golden hues that seem to shimmer with heat. The air hums with the buzz of insects, and the scent of ripening grain mingles with wild herbs carried on the breeze. You and your wife move with the slow grace that comes from countless seasons spent working the land together. In these long days, you witness the medieval tradition of feudal courtship, where families often arranged marriages to strengthen alliances and secure property. Love, if it came, was sometimes a fortunate byproduct rather than the main event. Still, personal affection and companionship mattered deeply to many, weaving their own quiet stories beneath the grand social plans. You find a quirky anecdote about medieval wedding feasts, how guests sometimes played pranks on the newlyweds, like placing a fake spider in the bride's shoe or slipping a bit of soot into the groom's hair. These jests were meant to test the couple's patience and humor, a playful rite of passage for their shared life ahead. Historians still debate the extent to which these customs varied across regions and classes, and how much they influenced modern wedding traditions. What remains clear is that marriage in medieval times was a complex mix of duty, love, and community. As the sun sets, casting a warm glow over the village, you and your wife share a quiet moment beneath the fading light, knowing that your story is part of this vast, tangled history. And as you close your eyes tonight, remember, this medieval love may seem distant and strange, but at its heart, it's about two people finding warmth and hope together, just like you. Now, as the day draws softly to a close, let your mind ease like the slow sinking of the sun beneath the horizon. The echoes of laughter and whispered stories from long ago fade gently into the calm night air. Feel the warmth of the hearth lingering in your chest, a quiet reminder that even in times of hardship, love and connection endure. Imagine the soft rustle of leaves in a summer breeze, the distant murmur of a village settling into rest. Let your thoughts drift light and unburdened like petals floating on a calm river. Every season, every story you've heard tonight is part of a tapestry woven with patience, resilience, and hope. You're wrapped in the comfort of this history, not as a burden, but as a gentle presence, a reminder that beneath the surface of time, people have always sought connection and kindness. So now dim the lights just a little more, feel the softness around you, and let your breathing slow. The night holds you tenderly, and the story of medieval love carries you into dreams as warm and enduring as a summer sunset. Good night.